just my own opinion. Now, 24 years ago, exactly, 1995, visiting Pope John Paul II released a document in Cameroon's capital, Yaoundé. It was dubbed the Ecclesia in Africa. Now, about a quarter century down the road, we ask how much of those papal prescriptions have been embraced by, well, the Catholic Church in Cameroon and Africa in general. And that's why he's here with us now. He's a permanent consultant, as you should know by now, on these matters. He's not only a journalist, he's also a writer, and he counts several books on the shelves. You just need to go there and find out Martin Jumba. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, Divine. Always a pleasure to be here.
Despite the heavy downpours.
Well, it's the season.
Yeah,
Thank God for the rain.
Like Kimani was saying, we don't need to complain because this is the season.
This is the season, and I like
there's a reason for every season.
And I like his preaching for peace. I mean, it was wonderful.
We desperately need peace in Cameroon right now.
Should recover the peace.
We're losing.
Unfortunately.
I want to thank you sincerely for coming.
Right.
We're going to be delving into Ecclesia in Africa, but first of all, we should look at the special synod of bishops.
Yes, it's just called.
What's that all about?
You know, in the Vatican, the Pope sometimes convenes what they call the Special Assembly of the Synod of Bishops.
Okay.
That look at the church in different parts of the world. You know, you have Special Assembly of the Synod of Bishops for Africa, for the Americas, for Europe, you know, for Asia. So in 1994 actually.
Okay, that's 1 year before the Pope
before the
came
proclamation of the Ecclesia in Africa. The Pope John Paul II convened for the first time, I believe, that what they call the Special Assembly of the Synod of Bishops for Africa.
Okay.
As got African bishops and cardinals, and from our country, I believe Cardinal Toomey was there.
Yes.
The late Archbishop of Bamenda, Paul Vedrikov, was there, and I believe one or two other bishops joined the other bishops in Africa and cardinals at the Vatican to look at the church in Africa.
Okay.
Yes, how the church in Africa was, what progress it was making, and how the church was faring.
Okay.
And then after that, they produced what they call the post-synodal apostolic exhortation.
All right.
Post-synodal apostolic exhortation is a document that comes out of the Special Assembly of the Synod.
In other words, Ecclesia in Africa, is that?
Ecclesia in Africa was a post-synodal apostolic exhortation.
Okay.
That was a document that was produced at that time.
Okay.
There was the second assembly of the Synod of Bishops, which came later with Pope Benedict, and they produced another document. Africae Munus, yes. Right. So that's a different one. Okay. But in 1995, the Pope came to Cameroon, Pope John Paul II, and proclaimed the Special Assembly, the Post-Synodal Apostolic Exhortation in Yaoundé.
Right.
And what was significant in that document is that it was the document for the first time ever in the history of the Church that such a document was signed outside the Vatican.
Okay.
Documents of that nature were always signed in the Vatican, but for the first time they were signed outside the Vatican, and it was in Cameroon, in Yaoundé, 1995.
And then Pope Benedict again in Cameroon. Before you continue, why is Cameroon so special for the Catholic Church in Africa?
Our friend was talking about a country, a beautiful country. We need to, the peace that used to reign in our country, which could attract people of that nature.
All right.
Yes, it was there, and we seem to be fast losing that, which is quite unfortunate. So, well, I believe it was what was said to be the stability of Cameroon in a region that was very prone to turbulence, and then Cameroon, had quite some peace.
Okay.
And so the Pope came to Cameroon in 1995 and gave this document to the church in Africa. Right. A significant document, actually. Which
it was hinged on 5 themes: enculturation,
yes,
evangelism.
That's right. Evangelization was separated into themes. Okay. You had evangelization, you have enculturation, dialogue,
justice and
peace, the means of social communication. Means of social communication concerns you and me.
Yeah, we've been discussing social communications in the church for
that's right.
a while now.
But evangelization is just how to spread the gospel.
Okay.
In the families, in in our communities.
Okay.
You know, the means to use to spread the gospel. Inculturation is dealing with, well, Africa is we have our own
traditions, our cultures, our customs.
So how do you embed the church's doctrine in an environment where we have our own traditional religion?
Inculturation actually stands out to me because it's kind of controversial.
Yes, it is. Right.
Does it mean carrying the juju bags into church and so on? Is that what inculturation means in this case?
You know, everybody, each person seems to have their own definition of inculturation.
Okay.
Right? Yes. The other day there was a kind of a juju dancing in the church in one of the churches in the Diocese of Kumbu, and there has been this, you know, discussion: do we have to have people dancing,
kikum coming into church?
Into the church?
Right.
Is that canonically allowed? And so on. So there's been quite some discussion, and everybody seems to have their own definition of what inculturation really is. Okay. But from the document that came out, post in Ecclesia in Africa, you see, the idea of inculturation is to see how the gospel message can be embedded in our tradition, okay, and how it can the gospel message can be used to well, maybe say purify some of the practices, the traditional practices.
That's like taming our traditions and culture.
Yes. So, you know,
too.
people seem to have their own definition. Some people think that it's wearing a agbada and everything and coming to church, that is inculturation. Something is bring. You know, at first in the Catholic Church, you know, which has been, must say there's quite some evolution. Dancing in church was not really thought of to be something good. Yes. They couldn't play drums in the church. They couldn't. But right now, you know, all those things are.
The conservatives are losing.
That's right. They're giving way to the young,
charismatic,
radical ones, right, where you have drumming in church, dancing in church, and so on. Where at appropriate moments. Okay. Of course, yes. So the evangelization, inculturation, interreligious dialogue, of course, dialogue between Catholicism and Islam, for example.
Oh, all right. Does it really function?
Oh yeah. There is even right here in Cameroon attempts at that, but there is the Catholic Church and Islam in dialogue at various levels. Okay. You know. And then Catholicism and traditional religion, what we're talking about right now. Mm-hmm. And then dialogue even within the family. Okay. Dialogue in the parishes. Mm-hmm. Dialogue in the level of the diocese. The dialogue between the bishops and his priests, you know. And then you have the other one was Justice and Peace. Justice and Peace.
Yes. The Catholic Church used to have this very buoyant institution called the
Justice and Peace Commission. Yes. Right. So that some of those groups are led by, you know, Catholic lawyers, or Catholic magistrates, so that they ensure that if people who are suffering persecution, yes, can have a right to be. To have a fair hearing in the court of law. All right. Yes, and they do a good job in that respect. Just about every diocese has a Justice and Peace Commission. Yeah, but
what we had at the national level in Cameroon used to be very vocal, but suddenly it just went, it's like it's comatose.
You know, usually those commissions depend on who's leading them. All right. You have somebody who's dynamic and forceful. They can come out, you know, quite forcefully, but they're still there, quite active. The Justice and Peace Commission in the Archdiocese of Bamenda, for example, is very, very active. Okay. Yes, especially for the first time ever, the Justice and Peace Commission of the Archdiocese of Bamenda had somebody prosecuted and jailed for child trafficking. Okay. Yes, got some children from Nigeria and trafficked them around here. You know what's happening now? You know, where you have these little girls are brought from the villages into towns, and sometimes the girl doesn't even know who brought her there, or you know, and she's supposed to be paid,
Right.
Yeah, but the pay does not go to the girl, it goes perhaps to the person who brought her there and things like that.
So some end up in Gabon and Equatorial Guinea.
It's a very tragic situation for our young people. And the case of in Bamida now, in the northwest and the southwest region, what's happening there now, where families are dispersed and those children are roaming around town here, and they're very vulnerable, you know, which is very unfortunate.
I think so.
So in the also the question of the means of social communication, of course, the radio, television, how that helps the church in
spreading
the gospel. And the Vatican was very clear on that, in inviting churches, different dioceses and Episcopal conferences in Africa to promote, to set up radio stations, to set up television stations, and and spread the gospel.
Okay.
And that has been heard. Radio Veritas, what we talked about the other day here in the Archdiocese of Douala, actually emanated from Ecclesia in Africa.
Okay.
Because when Ecclesia in Africa was promulgated in Yaoundé, the Archbishop then, the Emeritus today, Christian Cardinal Toubé, convened a local commission in the Archdiocese to examine Ecclesia in Africa, because a document like that is very general.
It's meant for implementation.
Yes, it is how you implement it at the local level. And it's for the local ordinary, the bishop, to see how it can apply to his diocese. Okay. And so we met here in Douala and examined that document and came out with a small pamphlet which looked at the implementation of Ecclesia in Africa at the level of the Archdiocese of Douala.
Okay.
Yes.
And I think that has been successful.
Yeah.
Because Radio Veritas is eloquent.
And now Television Veritas actually emanated from that, because the Christians, as the bishop, give us a radio station.
Okay.
Yes. And so it came to be. You see, so.
Congratulations.
Oh,
just know that, 3 popes out of all have been to Africa, starting with Paul VI in 1964.
1964 in Uganda. Actually, the first pope ever to visited Africa, Pope Paul VI, and that's where he canonized the martyrs of Uganda.
Okay. Yes,
during his visit. And he said something, it's a good thing you remind me about him. He said to the church in Africa, you are now missionaries to yourself. What he meant by that was because in those years in Africa, missionaries were coming from Europe.
All white people.
Yes, all of them were just white people coming to evangelize the church in Africa. In Cameroon, in West Cameroon, for example, there were the Marian missionaries who came from London. And so in 1964, I think Paul VI said, you are now missionaries to yourselves. Okay. And that the church in Africa picked up that challenge to the extent that even today, there are more vocations in Africa than there are even in Europe or North America. Africans are, in fact, going to
taking charge of the destiny of their church.
In those, even in those countries.
Okay.
There are many Nigerian priests, for example, in North America now.
All right.
Then you even have Americans themselves. And the same thing in Europe. So it's going in that direction.
While waiting for the next Pope, for the next papal visit to Cameroon, we wish you well. Thank you very much for coming.
No problem. I believe the Pope will come back as many times as possible if we bring peace back to our country.
I think we need the Pope's visit again.
That's what we need now more than anything else. End this senseless war and get our people
back on track.
So that our children can go back to school. And you're talking about going back to school now. But, the guns are still there. Why don't we silence the guns, get around the table, discuss this thing, and end the war? Okay. So that we can have the peace we've lost so far. That's why, like musicians, when they pick up these themes and spread them, people hear them much more loudly than they do the politicians. So
thanks once again for making it despite the rain. It's God's time.
We'll give thanks to God for the rain.
Such a pleasure to hear from you once again. We'll be counting on you for next week on Monday.
Yes, next week we'll be here. We'll still talk about the visit of Pope Benedict XVI with another document, another post
Africae Munus.
Africae Munus, which is talking about Africa, justice, peace, and reconciliation.
A promise is a debt.
Promise is a debt.
I will be counting on you for Monday.
All right.